Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to work from down here just because if I work from there, up there, you'll only see my from my forehead up. So this way, I actually go all the way down. What I'd like to talk about this morning is some work we've been doing. The company I work for, User Interface Engineering, we study how people work with technology, and we've been looking at teams and how you put together a development team that will really create a product or service that has a great experience. And so what I thought I'd talk about for the next little while is that. And to do that, I want to talk about this. This is the Sansa E210 MP3 player created by a company called SanDisk. And this is an amazing little piece of hardware. It's really a very stunning MP3 player. It's got great sound. It has an incredible display. It has a really great, very fast storage system. It has it comes with a wonderful set of earplugs. And the folks at SanDisk think that this thing is really going to make a difference in terms of producing a really big hit in the market. And they've been very excited about doing this. And SanDisk knows this because they are basically the number 2 player in the MP3 market. Microsoft is now the number 3 player with the Zune. So they've got this really great piece of hardware, and they think it's going to be really wonderful. Just out of curiosity, how many people here own or know somebody who owns a SanDisk MP3 player? Okay, about 6 of you. Okay. How many people here own or know somebody who owns an iPod? Okay, so that's what SanDisk is up against. Okay. The iPod has 75% of the market, and what's fascinating, more than 75% of the market, and what's fascinating is they've done that with an inferior piece of technology. The hardware in this is not the best you can buy. It's not the cheapest you can buy. It's not the best processor. It's not the best sound. Everybody in the industry, all the analysts, know and will tell you that this is not a particularly interesting unit. Yet they have 75% of the market. Why is that? Well, in some ways, it's because of this. This is iTunes. This is the software that drives it. And they give this away for free. But it's not just iTunes, it's also the iTunes Music Store, where they sell songs for 99 cents. And it's not just the store, it's the fact that if you have a problem with your iPod, you can take it to an Apple store in any number of cities now. And the people behind the counter, who they call Apple geniuses, will actually work on it. And in fact, it's not just that, but they've also turned the iPod into a fashion statement. People love to show off their iPod, and people love to see other people's iPods. It's not unusual to hear a conversation that goes, "Hey, I just got a new iPod. You want to see it?" And people go, "Yeah, show me." "Hey, you want to see my Samsung?" "No." "Please don't ever ask me that again." Okay? So, the iPod is become this entire experience. Owning an iPod is not just buying a physical unit. It's an entire experience. In the morning, my alarm clock goes off, and the radio station plays music. And every so often, they play something I haven't heard before that I really like. So I can go to their website, click on an icon, and within a minute have that song downloaded on my iTunes, on my iPod. Okay. It's an amazing experience, this ability to just have, from the moment you hear a song to owning that song, be just, less than what it takes to order a coffee at Starbucks. That's what they've been able to do. And this is why they have 75% of the market share. Well, I got to tell you, people have noticed. Okay? This has become a discussion in boardrooms all across the world. And the reason is this. Since Apple started selling music, they've sold more than 2 billion songs. Okay? 4 years ago, they weren't even in the music industry. Now they are the top online reseller. They're in the top 5 retailers of music all around the world. And they've completely changed the way the music industry works. As of 2006, in the music industry, more money was made from individual songs than from entire CDs, plastic CDs. 60% of the revenue of the music industry now comes from individual songs, and most of that goes through iTunes. So, 2 billion songs, 99 cents each. Pretty soon that begins to add up to real money. So here we have a company who 4 years ago entered a new industry, and now they're a major player. And they're selling songs at a run rate of more than 1 billion every year now. So that's just going to keep going. But it's not just the actual songs that have made a difference. Between October 1st and December 31st of 2006, they sold more than 21 million hardware units, 21 million iPods. If you do the math, that's more than 2 every second. So, Apple's done pretty well out of this. They have created this experience, and because they created this experience, they have actually generated a whole new industry, a whole new business, and that's gotten people's attention. One of the people whose attention it's gotten are the folks over at Blockbuster. Blockbuster came out with a new service recently. What you can do is you can go to the website. Instead of having to go to the store, you can go to the website. You can choose movies you'd like to see. They put them in a little envelope. They send them to you. You can keep them as long as you want. You don't have to send them back until you've seen them. There's no late fees involved. When you send one back, they send you the next one on your list instantly. It's a really great idea if only they'd thought of it first. How many people here either subscribe or know someone who subscribes to the Blockbuster service? Okay, a handful of you. How many people here either subscribe or nobody subscribes to Netflix? Okay. Now, Netflix didn't exist as a company 8 years ago. And the home-delivered DVD industry didn't exist 8 years ago. Netflix is now twice the market capitalization of Blockbuster. And in fact, they've been making huge profits every year, whereas Blockbuster's been losing money. They currently have more than 6 million subscribers. They have had more than 20 contiguous quarters of greater than 50% growth, whereas Blockbuster's been announcing losses every quarter and laying people off, closing stores. And the thing is that Netflix has done this without a single store. You don't deal with a single surly teenager. Instead, you log into a website. Everything is done through the website. The entire experience is done on the web. So here we have a business that has basically destroyed a leader in the marketplace through a website, with only a website. Now, that experience on that website has to work. And they measure it very closely. And they measure it in a very interesting way. Leslie Kilgore, the chief marketing officer, told me that some interesting statistics. one of the metrics they use to measure the success of their website, it's not the number of visitors or the number of subscribers or the number of people who, how long they stay on pages or any of those things you get from your analytics. It's a really interesting measure they use. They ask new subscribers how they heard about the service. And 85% of new subscribers say they decided to sign up because of a friend or family member who wouldn't shut up about it. And 93% of existing subscribers say that they regularly evangelize, which is a fancy word for never shutting up, about the service to their friends and family members. So that's the metrics they use to measure success. In fact, these metrics predict sales by 6 weeks. So every week they are off surveying these things, and when they see a dip in these numbers, they know they've done something wrong and their sales are about to tank. So here we have two companies, Apple and Netflix. They've completely redefined the industries they are in, and they did it purely through experiences that they created. The experience of using their products and services. That's what experience design can get you when you do it well. Here's what experience design can get you when you do it poorly. A large big box retailer. I'm sure many of you have shopped there many times. They're a $25 billion a year industry. They have a website. In 2003, they decided to redesign their website. The day they launched the new website, which they spent $100 million to redesign, I'm going to repeat that. They spent $100 million on a redesign of their website. The day they launched it, they saw a 20% reduction in sales that they didn't recover until this year. $100 million. Imagine what they could have gotten if they'd only spent $50 million. A 20% reduction in their sales because they launched a new site. In Boston, we have a law firm that has 735 lawyers, 1,700 employees. And one day, someone had the brilliant idea to switch their intranet from a static set of HTML pages to Microsoft SharePoint. Bad idea. I see people sinking in their seats right now. For those of you who've never had the experience of using Microsoft SharePoint, it's a great tool. It's got all sorts of functionality. Using SharePoint to develop a website is sort of like you deciding that you want to build your own house, so your best friend says, "Oh, I know exactly what you should do." And he takes you and puts you in your car, and he drives you to the nearest Home Depot, and he drops you off. He says, "Hey, everything you need is here," and then he leaves you there. That's the Microsoft SharePoint experience. So one day they decided to take HTML pages and they turn on take them away and they turn on SharePoint, and the entire law firm grinds to a halt. Nothing is where anybody expects it to be. Nobody knows what to do next. The whole thing is just a disaster. They don't know how to deal with this. And it turns out that this disaster is primarily because they didn't think about the experience of using this stuff. So all of a sudden, nobody can get their work done. And it's the only time I've ever been called into the office of the managing principal, principal partner of a major law firm, to talk about large buttons and how what he could do to get his big, large blue HTML buttons back that he had been so fond of for 9 years. Because what they did is every major function of the internet was a button. So they had 4 across and 12 down. Big 100-pixel high buttons with big text. It was the ugliest thing you'd ever seen, and man, this partner wanted that more than anything at this moment. One of the top 10 internet properties hires one of the top design firms to come in and redesign their website, give it a great new look and feel. And I got to tell you, these guys did an amazing job. They completely rethought the site. They completely redid it. They launched and immediately saw a 40% drop in page views because the site was just that much more efficient. The problem was every page view equals an ad. So a 40% drop in page views is a 40% drop in ad revenue. Oops. They had a better experience except from the business perspective. So as we try and figure out what does it mean to produce successful experiences, what we've come to realize is that successful experience design comes when you integrate the user and the business. You have to keep both those things together. And so we've been trying to figure out what it takes to build a team to be able to put together, if you want your product or service to be the next iPod or Netflix, what is that going to take? And so we've been looking at just that. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to go to a conference for the American Institute of Graphic Artists. It was a little workshop where they had invited all these high-powered graphic designers to Santa Fe to talk about what the future of interactive graphic design was going to be. And there were some really incredible people in the room. And apparently the reason I was invited, because I'm not a graphic artist. I have no artistic skill whatsoever. The only thing I can draw is blood. The reason they brought me is because I was the usability guy. I was the token usability guy at this conference. And they asked me to talk about, how you measure successful design. And so as far as I can tell, the reason I was there was so that I could explain how we measure successful design, and then they could rant and rage about how most of the important things can't be measured, and I'm an idiot. And that was really the purpose of my session as far as I could tell. I'm still bitter. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was the next day they had this show and tell where all these designers got to bring out what they called artifacts, things they'd worked on that they thought were really amazing, and they wanted to show the world. And I got to tell you, most of it I didn't understand. It was, wow, I love the neo-Bauhausism of that. Yes, okay. What does it do? Oh, we don't worry about that. We're going to work on function in the next release. But there was this one guy, a guy named Gonzito. I'd heard about him. I'd never met him. He was the creative director at the time of Rare Medium, one of the big New York firms, and he'd done some really incredible stuff. But he showed this little design. What it was, the design was he had taken the Wall Street Journal website and he'd completely re-envisioned it. This is the current Wall Street Journal website, not what he had done. But he had sat down he wasn't hired by the Wall Street Journal people. He just on his own created this design for the Wall Street Journal site, what it could look like if you seriously thought about it. And he had all these different pages and all these different things that he'd worked on, and he sat there and he walked through each page and each thing, and I was completely blown away by this revitalized design that he'd come up with. Because everything that he said, every design change he made, every rationalization he had behind it, completely matched a 2-year study that we had just completed on financial services stuff. We had just gone out and spent more than $1 million studying investors of all different types, day traders and buy and hold investors and all different types of investors, people who stick money in their mattresses. We talked to them all. And we had really spent a lot of time researching how those people get information so they can make their investment decisions, and what information they could get that they're currently not getting. And we had just produced this huge report for our clients, and every single thing that he'd put into that design of the Wall Street Journal, he could have found had he read that report. So I was completely blown away. I wanted to know what kind of research he did to figure out how to what problems to solve, because he'd done such a great job of solving them. And I asked him what he had done to do that. And he said, well, I just sat back and thought about it. I said, who'd you talk to? Did you do any research? I didn't do any research. I said, I was so confused about this. I said, let me get this right. All you did was sit and think about this and come up with this design? He goes, yeah. I couldn't believe that. I don't know if you know Alan Cooper. Alan Cooper wrote The Inmates Are Running the Asylum and About Face. He runs a design firm called Cooper. He's not very inventive. And he was sitting in the back of the room. He was futzing with his Nikon digital camera, which he's always doing. And he said, he shouts from the back of the room. I said, so let me get this right. You just sat there and thought about it and came up with all these things that took me 2 years to go and do research to figure out. And Alan from the back of the room shouts, yeah, Jared, that's what designers do. Huh. Okay. I believe that. I believe that Gong Zito did that. I believe that there are people who can do that. I believe there are people, if they think hard enough about something, they come up with amazing results. I'm not that person. I have to go out and do research. I have to go find stuff out. But there are people who can do this. In fact, I did a bunch of research and discovered that there's an entire study of research about this subject, about people who just innately can do things. It has to do with, the body of research in psychology circles actually started with baby chicks. You see, baby chicks, you cannot tell the gender of a baby chick until they are 6 weeks old. But in order to efficiently farm chickens, you really have to make that determination at the 2 to 3 week part. But there's no physical attributes of a baby chick that you can use to discern what the gender is at 2 to 3 weeks. Yet there are people who can. And their profession is to determine what gender chicks are. That's what they do all day. They have a name. They're called chicken sexers. And chicken sexers spend their time telling you what the gender of the chicks are. All these chicks parade past them in these little troughs, and as they parade past, they go male, female, female, male, male, female, female, male, male, and they have about a 97% accuracy rate. Chicken sexing is a profession you can get paid for. The weird thing about chicken sexing is that if you ask a chicken sexer how to chicken sex, they can't tell you. They'll give you some wacky thing they do. Everyone will tell you something slightly different, and none of them, if you then do what they say, will lead you to accurate chicken sexing. But you can actually learn how to chicken sex. It's not that hard. You stand next to one of these guys, and as the chickens parade by, you go male, female, female, male, male, female, female, male. And due to the miracle of probability, you start at a 50% accuracy rate. And every time you get it wrong, the trained chicken sexer hits you in the arm. After a week of severe bruising, you will get up to about a 60 to 70% accuracy rate. After a month, you'll get to 75%. And if you spend long enough at it, you can work your way up to the 95% or better. So, chicken sexing is this amazing thing that any of us could learn how to do if we spent enough time getting bruised. But none of us know how to do it, and nobody knows how to talk about how to do it. And if you think I'm making this up, it's in Wikipedia. So, the thing is that chicken sexing isn't the only thing out there that's like this. It turns out that there are other things that are like this. In World War II, I'm sorry, let me start before that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Midwives, the only way that or the most accurate way we have of assessing the weight of a baby before it's born, while it's still in the womb, in the last trimester, the most accurate tool, no matter what instrumentation man has been able to come up with to date, the most accurate tool we've had so far is the midwife puts their hands on the mother's stomach and guesses. That is proven to be far more accurate than any ultrasound or other piece of equipment we've been able to come up with at predicting what the weight of the baby will be at birth. Midwives, they just guess, and they're more accurate than everything else. In World War II, which is what I meant to talk about before, they found that planes coming over the English Channel sometimes contained British soldiers, or British airmen, and sometimes didn't. The ones that didn't often left nasty little packages on London. So it became really important to figure out which planes were friendly and which ones weren't. And the only way they could tell before these people got within range to be able to start dropping things on you was they had these people who sat on the beaches called plane spotters. And plane spotters were trained to determine whether a plane was either a Luftwaffe plane or an RAF plane. But nobody knew how they did it, so they couldn't train new people to do it. They just knew. And so they had to come up with ways to figure out how to get new plane spotters, because standing on the beach looking at an airplane with machine guns turns out not to be a great way to lengthen your life expectancy. If you've ever tried to make your own sushi, it can be extremely difficult. And for whatever reason, it never tastes like the good stuff. To become a professional sushi chef, that's really hard to say this early in the morning. To become a professional sushi chef, the final step of training after you learn the mechanics involves sitting next to another chef and just working alongside them for weeks on end. The best sushi chefs go to Japan and they work alongside the uber sushi chefs for weeks on end, not talking about how to make sushi, but just absorbing it by osmosis, because there's no other way to learn it. They can't tell you what they do, they just do it. Now, all these things share something. They share the fact that what they're doing is learned, but it's not open to introspection. So this is the underlying psychological principle here, is that chicken sexing, in essence, we can learn how to do it, but we can't describe how we learn how to do it. And that's really important, because it turns out that successful experience design is just that way too. It's learned, but it's not open to introspection. We can't tell people how to do experience design, but we do know that we can learn how to do it. When we talk to people who are Netflix customers and we ask them, what is it about Netflix that makes it such a great service? They can go on for hours. They'll tell us that they love the selection of movies. They'll tell us that they've got stuff that they can't get in the store. They'll tell us that they love the fact that they can keep the disc as long as they want, that if they go on vacation, they don't have to worry about sending it back. They'll tell us about how they love the recommendation system and how it seems to recommend movies they really like to watch. They tell us all sorts of things. But what they never tell us, even though the website is the only way people can use this, they never ever tell us how great the navigation system on the website is. That doesn't come up in conversation. The information architecture of the website is never one of the reasons they love using the site. Nor do they tell us that they love the fact that Netflix uses Ajax. That never comes up either. Netflix is one of the first people to use Ajax in a commercial environment. They make huge use of it, from the rating systems for the stars to little pop-ups. They have an entire checkout process. If you're an Ajax developer, you definitely want to go buy a DVD from them, because the checkout process for a DVD is an entire Ajax application. It's stunning to see how it works. You can go, everything is done without a single page refresh. It's beautiful. But not a single user will tell you that they love that feature. Nor will they tell you about the social design aspects of this. My colleague Josh Porter is going to be talking a little later about social design, but Netflix is one of the first sites to really integrate social design in a true commercial environment with real purposes. You can put in your friends and contacts. You can see what your friends do. You have all this capability to see. They have this little game where you can figure out what DVDs people hated, so you basically put in your friends and you see what they rate movies for, and you see what movies they like and what they recommend to you, and you can see how well you match your movie taste to their movie taste. They'll give you a percentage of what matches, and you can really figure out what friends actually have taste you like. And you can figure out how well you know these people. It's a very cool feature. But nobody ever talks about the fact that they were the pioneers in doing all this social design in a commercial environment. Nobody talks about this because good design, when it's done well, it's invisible. And the problem is that when good design is invisible, that's not necessarily a good thing, because those of us who are trying to do really good design, it's really hard to do good work when, if you do it really well, it disappears. Right? That's hard to put on your portfolio. Well, all the stuff you can't see, that's me. Okay? Good design, good experience design is like the air conditioning in a room. You only think about the air conditioning in a room, when it's cold, or when it's too warm, or when it's making too much noise, or when it's dripping on you. That's when you think about the air conditioning. I can bet you, even though you've probably been in thousands of meetings in your life, no one has ever interrupted a meeting to say, by the way, I just want to interrupt this meeting. I know we're talking about important stuff, but I just want to interrupt this meeting and say, I really love the temperature here. This is really quite comfortable. Thank you so much. Whoever did that, thanks. I'm there. Nobody ever does that. And because when something is done well, it turns invisible. Sell that to your manager. Over at Hertz, at one point, if you tried to make a reservation for a car at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, known as SeaTac, you put in the code for SeaTac Airport, SEA, and you were instantly greeted with a menu of 3 airports to choose from. You could choose Seattle-Tacoma Airport in Seattle, Western Australia, U.S., Seattle-Tacoma Airport in Seattle, Wanganui, U.S., or Seattle-Tacoma Airport in Seattle, Washington, U.S. This is some sort of intelligence quiz, isn't it? I didn't even know where Wanganui was till I started this project. It's in Western Australia, apparently, or New Zealand. New Zealand? New Zealand. Yes. So, this is obvious some sort of database problem, but it affects the experience. And it doesn't just happen at Hertz. Over at Travelocity, if you tried to fly to Spokane, Washington, you were given a choice between Spokane, Washington GEG and Spokane, Washington SFF. And you better guess right, because if you choose the right one, you're rewarded with a lovely set of airfares to Spokane. And if you guess wrong, you get an error message telling you that we're unable to find any flights to Spokane, Washington. And you get a suggestion as to what you can do. You can try a nearby city with a larger airport. If you've ever been to Spokane, you will know there is no such thing as a nearby city. When you try and book a flight on U.S. Airways, you have to agree to the terms and conditions of that flight, the fare conditions. In order to agree to the fare conditions, you have to decide here, basically, whether this is acceptable to you. And you have to read 20 screens for each fare, and typically a flight with a round trip that has a stop over has four legs, so that's 4 fares, so that's 80 pages of this you have to agree to. United's a little better only because the person who did United's website apparently used to be a COBOL programmer. Over at American, they had major innovations using paragraphs and headings. But look at this text here. Here, let me read you a piece of this, because this is wonderful stuff. This is the kind of stuff you want to put on a greeting card. It says here, note, when combined with other fares to form round/open jaw trips, the most restrictive conditions apply. These include minimum/maximum stay/reservation/ticketing requirements/stopover provisions/and cancellation/change penalties/service charges or combination provisions. When 2 stopovers are made, if no combinable fare is available on the shorter sector flown, any applicable one-way fare may be used and will not take on the conditions of the most restrictive fare. Additional conditions apply. Circle trip, permitted, maximum of 2 stopovers permitted, open jaw, single open jaw permitted at either origin or destination, the mileage of the shorter sector flown must be equal to / greater than the mileage between the points of the open jaw. What the hell does that mean? I know what every word means in that paragraph. I just don't know what they mean when they put them in these sentences. Now, who designed this experience? Lawyers. Lawyers designed this experience. And of course, we can't expect lawyers to know anything about experience design. After all, they only go to 7 years of school. And they focus on completely different stuff. So it would be completely unrealistic for us to think that lawyers could do great experience design, which is why I cannot, for the life of me, understand what the hell happened at Southwest. This is Southwest's most restrictive fare. It fits on a single screen. And they did something that no one else did. They had a major innovation. They used English. And all of a sudden, you can understand what they're trying to tell you. They've created a completely different experience. And so what does this tell us? Well, this tells us that experience design is something that we have to pay complete attention to. Right? And the skills that we need are huge. Well, what this says is, we need copywriting, because what we just saw there was copywriting. But we also need to be able to do information architecture. We need to be able to create designs really quickly. We need the skills to do that. We need the skills to go out and measure the usability of things and see how to make changes based on how people interact with the designs that we put in front of them. We need to know how to create interactions that allow us to get from one place to another, the skills are required to create great interactions. We need to know how to do the visual design of the application, because not just organizing the interaction, but we have to understand how to take stuff and represent it graphically, not just for aesthetic purposes, but to communicate what's important and what isn't about the design. We need to know how to do great information design, because taking tables of information and displaying it in a way that people understand is really quite important. And we need to know how to do editing. This is something you rarely see talked about, but editing, which is pretty much the decision of what stays and what goes, is just as critical as everything else. So if you're going to build an experience design team, our research shows you have to have each of these skills on the team. You have to have all these things. But that's not where it stops. You also need to know how to go into the field and figure out what to do better. You need to know about the domain and if you're in the aircraft industry, what you need to know all about travel and aircrafts and all that sort of stuff. You need to know how the business works and how that will affect your design. You need to understand how to use the various tools that collect data from your site and from your machines to understand what to do there. You need to know how marketing works. You need to know how the technology works. You need to know how to justify the experience that you have. And you need to know how to take the designs you put and translate them into actual code. And finally, you need to know the various development methods that are out there and how they work. That's the skill set you need on your experienced design team. And that's really hard to do, because all of those skills you need to know in depth. And one of the stunning things that our research has shown is over the years, experienced design teams are getting smaller, not larger, which means that people have to have more and more of these skills. No longer can you just specialize in one thing and get away with it at most organizations. You have to be multidisciplinary. I love this picture because it really talks about what's going on in the when we talk about this multidisciplinary stuff. This is from the Mayo Health website, and it's beautiful because it talks about this problem in great depth. This image, I know it's a little early to see stuff like this, but this is an image of a brain aneurysm. And the person who drew this image obviously was very good in Illustrator. They could really do a nice job. In fact, they could do something that's one of the hardest things to do in digital art form, which is to draw the human form, right? It's very hard to draw a person, even with a pen, a sketch artist. But to actually draw the human form digitally is extremely difficult, and it takes a tremendous amount of talent. So this person has real skills when it comes to drawing the human form, but it goes further than that, because not only can we clearly see that this is the head of a woman, but we can see her spinal cord, her jaw area, and her cranial cavity represented in her head. So now we have the ability to see not just the outside of her, which we're all familiar at looking at, but we can then take a skull and put it into. Because when you just see a skull by itself, it's hard to realize that's a human. It's hard to make that jump. But here we can clearly see those elements. And then, so she obviously knew a whole bunch about anatomy when she drew this. And then here we see the representation of the artery. And we can clearly see where the aneurysm is growing here. And we can see in the inset what happens when that aneurysm busts. So there's obviously a lot of medical science here too. And this is a beautiful diagram, because if you have a close friend or a family member for whom the doctors have just diagnosed with a brain aneurysm, a term you may have never heard before in your life, just one glance at this picture will tell you why the doctors are panicked and feel that this needs to be dealt with right away. This is not a good thing, and you can clearly see that from this imagery. That was communicated in just seconds by the hard work of the artist who drew this. And that person showed skills in being able to use Illustrator, being able to draw the human form. She knew a lot about anatomy, knew an amazing amount of stuff about medical science. Multidisciplinary. And that's what happens when it goes well. But sometimes things go really, really wrong. Over at the FEMA website, they also have a graphic artist. And one day, the image on the FEMA website made it on to The Daily Show. And here's what Jon Stewart said about it. What should FEMA have done? Perhaps the answer can be found on their website, where you'll find, we're not lying, this chart, clearly depicting the agency's responsibility in the event of a disaster. Notice, and this is their actual chart, it begins with their response to a disaster, leads to recovery, mitigation, risk reduction, prevention, and preparedness, and ends up back in disaster. That is their chart. In truth, FEMA did exactly what they said they were going to do. Can you imagine being the graphic designer who comes home from a hard day at work? Which has gotten a little harder lately because work's been a bit chaotic and disorganized. And you want to just turn on the TV and get a few laughs. So you turn on your favorite show, and there's your design. That's really got to be an experience that I can't imagine. So, the designer here wanted to communicate something, but apparently didn't communicate exactly what they meant. And they didn't have a way to get feedback on that until they watched late night television. And so that's the problem, is that we need mechanisms. We need a whole culture that allows us to collect information. And this is sort of the last piece that we've come to the realization of, is that this is a very cultural thing. Good experience design is cultural. Now, one of the things we've learned is that there are some pieces to good experience design that are very important. First, you have to be able to talk to each other. We learned a long time ago that teams that can't talk to each other produce crappy designs. Teams that talk to each other, not just talk to each other, but talk to the other members of the organization, talk to customers, talk to users, talk to vendors, that have really good communications. Those are the ones that do the best. You know, it's a real sort of irony. Apple is probably, the best keeper of secrets of anybody. But when you get inside the shell, they are very good at communicating with each other. And it's really quite stunning how well they do that. You have to have a clear vision. Vision is absolutely critical for good design. And so you really have to have the ability to focus in that regard. You can think of a vision as a stake in the sand on the horizon. You can't get there today, but if you try hard enough, maybe in a year or two you'll find it. But you can clearly see it. And that flag is really important because you can tell whether any step you take will get you there or is going in the wrong direction. If you don't have a clear vision, you don't know where you're going. And the interesting thing is about the companies that are very good at experience design, not only does everyone have that clear vision, but they all have the same vision. You can talk to anyone privately and ask them, what's this design going to look like 5 years from now? And they will tell you the exact same thing everybody else will tell you. Someone's done a fabulous job of communicating the vision. Do you know what the experience of your design will be like 5 years from now? Have you thought about that? That's what we're talking about here. To do that, you have to have the right people on board. If you don't have the right people, it doesn't matter. If you don't have, you can have very nice people, but if they don't have the right skills, you're going to be in trouble. It turns out that making sure you've got people with the right skills is probably the most important thing you can do as a manager. And you have to have a way of getting information back to the people who are designing things. You have to have a loop, a feedback loop that gets you there. And to do that, you have to be able to execute that loop quickly. You have to have fast iterations. And so there's a whole process of making iterations happen that is critical. You have to first put a design out, and you have to get feedback back. The organizations that do this the fastest are the ones that are succeeding. Netflix pushes out a new design every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks they're trying something new. The folks over at Flickr, they're pushing out new designs 300 times a week. They get feedback all week long about things they do or don't do. The new designs, they're not radically different. You don't see a radical change from one design to the next, just little things, but they instantly get feedback. They instantly know if it's working. So, having a process where you can get feedback quickly is critical. One of the key elements of this is to eliminate major redesigns. If you're thinking about doing a redesign of your site, you're going in the wrong direction. Okay? If you look at the big players, none of them do redesigns. When was the last time you saw a new design for Yahoo? You may see a new page, but when was the last time the whole site was redesigned? Or Amazon. Has that changed since you started using it? Yeah, in little ways, but they've never had a redesign. Nobody who does this well ever has a major redesign. They just do little changes, bump, 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 all the time. The beauty of doing things in small changes is you substantially reduce the number of stakeholders involved. You substantially reduce the risk involved. And because, if you screw it up and you only worked on a couple of pages, you can just roll the old pages back. It's not a big deal. Even if you have to change the underlying architecture, you have to go to a whole new CMS or a whole new platform. Organizations are figuring out how to do that in pieces so that they can get feedback almost immediately as to whether the new piece is working better than the old piece, and they don't find out that they have a 20% reduction in sales on the first day with no way to roll back. So, eliminating major redesigns is absolutely a key piece. Another very important piece that separates the folks who are very good at this from the folks who aren't is that they put a huge emphasis on getting feedback. So many organizations spend their time just putting stuff over the wall and never finding any information. But these organizations get a tremendous amount of feedback into their process. Every time a customer is involved, everybody who needs to know about that gets some feedback that tells them what's going on. And everybody is involved. They're getting all the different players involved. Because design decisions happen everywhere. Lawyers make decisions about design. Are you getting them feedback about how well their decisions have affected the experience? We have one client, a major bank, that that has 160 public-facing websites that they know of. Every so often, they'll do a Google search and find a few more. They don't know who all the players are in the experiences they're creating. And as a result, it feels very disjoint. So it turns out that there's basically three approaches to this that you can take. There's the first approach that organizations start with is what's usually called the consulting approach, where you create a small team of people and they're going to work on the user experience for every project. And that works great as long as you have a small number of projects. But once you become successful and the number of projects grows, this typically starts to fail. So what we then see is what's called the review and approve approach. And the review and approve approach, you start to create standards and guidelines, and the idea is that the people who are in charge of experience, their job is no longer to create the experiences, that happens in the individual teams, but instead to review the experiences they create and approve them and say, okay, you need to follow the standards and we're going to see if you did that, and if you did that, we'll put the site up, and if you didn't, we won't. Okay. So that's what they do. But that turns out to not work very well for a long period of time because it creates bottlenecks. In fact, no organization that we've ever met that has instituted this approach to things has been able to maintain it for more than 2.5 years. So all of a sudden what happens is the team that's reviewing everything becomes a bottleneck, and systems abhor a bottleneck. And what happens is some vice president somewhere doesn't like the fact that the team hasn't gotten around to reviewing his group's design, and he just says, well, to hell with it, and we're going to launch it anyways, and then the whole system just collapses in on itself. So you run into problems. So the other approach that we see is called educate and administrate. And the educate and administrate, this is new in the last few years, but we're seeing a bunch of organizations do this. What happens is they take a proactive approach to design. So instead of reviewing everything and saying, oh yeah, you screwed up, what they do instead is they focus on doing things right from the get-go and understanding how to do this proactive design approach. And the way that works is that you spend time communicating, hey, we hear you're about to do a design. Let us tell you everything we know about who the users are and what they do and how they've worked with our site in the past and what things they expect and how they're going to work with it. And you use this process to educate people. And this turns out to be really quite key. Over at Avis, we were watching people use the site, and we came upon a user who tried to use this form, and they got stuck. They took one look at the form and said, but what if I don't have a middle initial? And the problem is because the middle initial has an asterisk next to it. And this user was foolish enough to think that asterisk meant that that was a mandatory field. Even though it clearly says at the top that asterisk is optional. Now, what idiot at Avis thought that asterisk meant optional? Well, I can tell you why they did this. They have 40 forms on their site, but this is the only form that has optional fields. And if they'd used the de facto standard of asterisk meaning mandatory, that meant they would have had to put an asterisk on every field on every form except for these 3 fields. And that's a senseless waste of asterisks. So they opted to conserve asterisks, or what we like to say in the business, they saved their asterisk. And from that point, what they did was focus on making sure that people understood it. But they didn't do such a good job now, did they? And had they done any amount of user testing, they would have found that people didn't find this confusing. And there are all sorts of other graphical treatments you could do other than an asterisk to communicate that something is optional. The word optional comes to mind. But they chose this, and as a result, they didn't know this. But the more important thing is, what's going to stop future teams from making this mistake again? How are they going to communicate that knowledge to other organizations, other groups within the organization that communicate, that says, hey, we learned something. We learned that when you put asterisk for optional, it doesn't work so good. How are you going to get that communicated? That turns out to be the challenge that most organizations have. We find problems all the time, but, do we have a good way of communicating that? Do we have a good way of educating that? And that's the key process. So, successful experience design is what we've learned in our research is a bunch of things. It integrates both the user and the business. It is learned, but it's not open to introspection. It's invisible. It's multidisciplinary. It's cultural. And it's still something that we're trying to learn how to do. We're getting better at it every day, but I can tell you, we don't completely know how to do this yet. If, for some reason, you found this the least bit interesting and you'd like to know more information, if you give me something with your email address on it, I will gladly send you a copy of our newsletter, which is free and easily unsubscribable, and we don't give your email address to anybody else. And that contains much more information about everything I've talked about and a whole bunch of other topics on web design, including the stuff that Josh is talking about later today and stuff I'll be talking about in my workshop tomorrow. So there's that. We also have virtual seminars, which are these 90-minute webcasts that you can subscribe to, and you gather your whole team around and learn a bunch of stuff about. We have reports that we're going to that we sell on our site. We have a conference, the User Interface Conference, which is coming up in November. It's very cool, and we're going to be announcing that this week. So the program's coming out. We're very excited about it. I think you'll find it very interesting, and you'll find out about that if you subscribe to our newsletter. We have a great blog, the BrainSparks blog on our site, and we have a ton of free articles and other resources available on the website, uie.com, which I'm desperately hoping is usable. Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior.